The mahogany boardroom inside my grandfather's estate was suffocatingly quiet. I sat at the long table, adjusting my tie, while my grandfather Arthur sat at the head. Beside him were my Aunt Victoria and her son, Brandon, both wearing smirk-like grins they barely tried to hide. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room before landing on the attorney seated to his left. "We are here to finalize the restructuring of Sterling Real Estate and the distribution of my estate." I leaned forward slightly. "Grandfather, I brought the updated valuation reports for the downtown commercial properties. We managed to double our net rental yield this quarter." "Keep those reports in your folder, Caleb," Aunt Victoria interrupted smoothly, taking a slow sip from her porcelain teacup. "We won't be needing accounting figures today." I frowned, looking at Arthur. What does she mean? I spent 10 years building up our commercial portfolio. We are about to expand into 3 new states. "Let Mr. Harrison read the document, Caleb," Arthur said firmly, waving a liver-spotted hand toward the attorney. "Listen quietly." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, unfolding a thick legal document. As per Arthur Sterling's instructions, the core assets of Sterling Real Estate, including all voting shares, residential developments, and the primary family trust, shall pass entirely to Brandon Sterling upon Arthur's passing or retirement. The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. I stared at the lawyer, my chest tightening. Wait, what about my share? What about the 20% equity Arthur promised me when I gave up my firm in New York to come back here? Brandon let out a low, arrogant laugh, leaning back in his leather chair. "Equity? Caleb, you were just an employee, a well-paid accountant. You didn't honestly think you were going to own my family's empire, did you?" "I worked 80 hours a week for 10 years, Brandon," I snapped, standing up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "I saved this company from bankruptcy when you were getting kicked out of business school. I renegotiated our debt, secured our banking licenses, and managed every single property." "Lower your voice, Caleb," Arthur commanded, his tone dropping into an icy chill. "You will show respect in this house." "Respect?" My voice trembled with raw betrayal. "Grandfather, is this true? After everything I gave up for you? After I buried my father and threw myself straight into saving your legacy?" "Your father was my younger son, Caleb," Arthur said, looking at me without a trace of emotion. "Brandon carries the primary family line. He bears the Sterling name directly from my eldest son. The legacy belongs to direct lineage. It belongs to Brandon. Brandon doesn't even know how to read a balance sheet," I shouted, pointing across the table at my cousin. "He has spent his whole life spending your money while I worked in the mud to earn it. He will ruin everything we built within 2 years. That is quite enough," Aunt Victoria interjected, her eyes flashing with triumphant malice. "Arthur made his decision based on family duty. You were compensated with a salary, Caleb. You were paid for your work. You are owed nothing more." I turned back to Arthur, desperate to see a single glint of warmth or gratitude in his eyes. "Grandfather, please tell me you aren't doing this. I sacrificed my youth for this firm. I didn't take a single vacation for 6 years because you needed me. And I paid your salary every 2 weeks," Arthur said coldly, resting his hands on his cane. "You did a job, Caleb, but this company is a bloodline inheritance. I will not hand the Sterling crown to a nephew when my grandson Brandon is standing right here." "I see." I breathed, the agonizing pain in my chest turning into a cold, hollow emptiness. The realization slammed into me like a physical blow. To them, I was never family. I was just cheap, loyal labor. "So, what are you going to do now, cousin?" Brandon taunted, tapping his golden watch on the table. "Are you going to clean out your desk? Or do you want me to give you a job as my personal assistant?" I looked at Brandon, then at Victoria's smug face, and finally at Arthur, who refused to meet my eyes again. "I won't be cleaning out my desk," I said, my voice suddenly dropping into a quiet, absolute stillness. "Because I am resigning right now. Effective immediately." Victoria smirked. "Well, that saves us the trouble of firing you. You think this is a victory, don't you?" I asked, looking between Victoria and Brandon. "You think you just won an empire, but you have no idea what it actually takes to keep this company afloat. We will do just fine without an accountant, Caleb. Arthur said dismissively. You may leave. I picked up my leather briefcase, leaving the property reports sitting untouched on the table. I spent 10 years giving you my loyalty, grandfather. I gave you my sweat, my time, and my trust. You will never get a single second of it again. Is that a threat? Brandon sneered. It's a promise, I said, turning my back on them. Enjoy the company, Brandon, because without me holding up the foundation, you're going to fall very, very hard. I walked out of the boardroom, stepping out into the cold rain outside the Sterling mansion. I pulled my collar up, took a deep breath of the wet air, and cut off every tie to the family that had used me. I vowed right then that I would never let anyone exploit my dedication again. The glass doors of Apex Commercial Holdings felt heavier than the wooden entry of the Sterling estate. I smoothed down my inexpensive suit, staring at the polished marble floor. Caleb Sterling? A sharp voice called out from the corner office. I stepped inside, meeting the piercing gaze of Eleanor Vance, senior partner of commercial risk. She scanned my resume, then looked up, resting her chin on folded hands. You spent 10 years managing Sterling real estate, Eleanor said, her tone analytical. Why apply for a junior analyst role here? The pay is a fraction of what you earned. I left my family's firm, Eleanor. I replied directly. I want a clean break. I need to build something on my own merit, not a bloodline. Eleanor tilted her head, observing me closely. Word on Wall Street is Arthur cut you out completely for young Brandon. He did. I admitted, my chest tightening briefly before I pushed the feeling down. And that was his mistake. I know commercial debt better than anyone in this city. Eleanor smiled slightly, leaning back in her chair. Bold claim. Prove it. Look at this portfolio on my desk, and tell me what you see. I stepped forward, scanning the figures on the top page. The yield on these retail properties is artificial. The cash flow relies on temporary tax breaks that expire in 6 months. If you fund this, you're looking at a 20% default rate. Eleanor chuckled, tossing her pen onto the desk. You notice that in 30 seconds. Most analysts miss it in 3 days. You start Monday, Caleb. Thank you, Eleanor, I said. You won't regret this. Don't make me regret it, she warned gently. In this firm, integrity and precision mean everything. Leave your family drama at the front door. Over the next 3 years, I threw myself into Apex with relentless discipline. While my former life faded into memory, I worked 80-hour weeks, analyzing complex debt structures, restructuring failing commercial loans, and securing high-value portfolios. 16 months into my tenure, Eleanor called me into the executive boardroom. You've brought in $40 million in clean commercial assets this year alone, Caleb, Eleanor said, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. The board approved your promotion. You are officially our new head of commercial lending. Head of lending? I blinked, taking the folder. That usually takes a decade. You earned it, Eleanor said firmly. You have an absolute eye for financial precision, and clients trust you. But tell me, have you checked the market reports on Sterling real estate lately? I paused, holding the folder tightly. I monitor the entire sector, Eleanor. I haven't contacted them, but I see their public filings. Brandon is burning through their capital reserves, she said, shaking her head. He launched 3 luxury housing projects without securing secondary credit lines. He's bleeding cash. I warned Arthur he lacked business sense. I murmured, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Brandon thinks taking loans is free money. Rumor has it Aunt Victoria is trying to quiet the board, Eleanor added. They are desperately seeking institutional refinancing to keep the doors open. They won't find easy money in this market, I said coldly. Interest rates are rising, and lenders know Brandon's reputation. Just make sure your personal history doesn't cloud your judgment if their debt lands on our desk, Eleanor cautioned, her eyes narrowing slightly. We lend based on risk analysis, not grudge matches. My focus is entirely on Apex, Eleanor, I replied with complete calm. If Sterling real estate ever crosses my desk, it will be treated strictly by the numbers. Later that evening, I sat in my new corner office, looking at the city skyline. My phone chimed with a news alert. Sterling Real Estate delays Q3 dividend payments. I set the phone face down. Part of me remembered the boy who had cried in the rain after being disinherited, desperate for his grandfather's approval. But that boy was gone. In his place was a man who had built a career from nothing through sheer grit, strategy, and unyielding work ethic. A knock on my door frame broke my thoughts. Franklin Ross, our senior forensic accountant, stepped inside holding a tablet. "Got a minute, Caleb?" Franklin asked, pulling up a sheet of financial data. "Always, Franklin. What do you have?" "A major real estate firm just applied for a massive $100 million liquidity loan through our secondary lending portal," Franklin said, leaning against my desk. "The debt ratio looks questionable, but they offered prime commercial land as collateral." I looked up, my eyes narrowing. "Which firm?" "Sterling Real Estate," Franklin revealed, tapping the screen. "Signed by Brandon Sterling himself. He needs the capital within 60 days, or his developments freeze." I stared at the name on the screen. The trap Brandon had dug for himself was finally opening up, just as I had predicted 3 years ago. "Leave the file on my desk, Franklin," I said softly. "Do you want me to assign it to another analyst team?" Franklin asked carefully, knowing my surname. "Given the connection?" "No," I replied, taking the file from his hands and opening the first page. "I will handle this underwriting personally." "Understood," Franklin said, nodding before stepping out into the quiet hallway. I looked down at Brandon's messy, arrogant signature on the bottom of the loan application. They had thrown me away like trash, believing I was nothing without their name. They had no idea that the very firm they were begging for a lifeline was now controlled by the man they had cast aside. "Let's see how much your legacy is really worth, Brandon," I whispered into the quiet office, closing the file. The application file for Sterling Real Estate lay open on my desk, glowing under the desk lamp. I tapped my pen against the glass top, calling Franklin back into my office. "Franklin, take a look at these cash flow projections," I said, pointing at the second page. "Does anything look off to you?" Franklin adjusted his glasses, leaning over the desk to examine the numbers. "Wait, they listed $20 million in liquid reserves under an offshore holding account. But the Q2 audit reports don't reflect that cash at all." "Because it doesn't exist," I said quietly. "Brandon falsified these liquidity statements to pass our minimum credit threshold. He needs this high-risk mortgage on the historic Sterling estate just to cover his operational losses." "That is bank fraud, Caleb," Franklin gasped, looking up in shock. "If I flag this to our legal team right now, the regulatory board will pull their corporate license immediately. If we reject them now, Brandon will just find a shadow lender or private equity firm to bail him out," I explained, leaning back in my chair. "He will kick the can down the road for another year." "So what are you suggesting?" Franklin asked, frowning. "We restructure the loan," I said firmly. "We adjust the terms to a high-interest, short-term commercial note, backed directly by the deed to the Sterling estate. I will personally approve the underwriting and retain sole oversight of the debt package." Franklin stared at me for a moment before a slow, knowing smile crossed his face. "The interest rate spike in month 6 will force a total liquidity freeze unless they double their revenue." "Which Brandon can't do," I replied. "Approve the note, Franklin. Let Brandon sign his own financial death warrant." 2 weeks later, the deal was finalized. Brandon signed every page without reading the fine print, blinded by the sudden influx of cash. The following month, I attended the Regional Real Estate Summit at the Grand Harbor Hotel alongside Eleanor Vance. The grand ballroom was packed with investors, developers, and city officials. As we made our way through the crowd, a loud, familiar voice cut through the noise. "We just closed a major $50 million deal with Apex Commercial Holdings," Aunt Victoria announced loudly to a group of local reporters near the center stage. She looked immaculate, holding a glass of champagne. "Sterling Real Estate is stronger than ever. My son Brandon has taken our vision to heights my nephew Caleb could only dream of." Eleanor glanced sideways at me, her eyes narrowing. "Do you want me to step in and correct her, Caleb?" "No," I whispered, keeping my composure completely intact. "Let her enjoy the spotlight, Eleanor. Pride always comes right before the fall." Victoria turned her head, spotting me standing near the pillar. A triumphant, cruel smirk formed on her lips as she stepped toward us, clutching her pearl necklace. Well, look who decided to attend," Victoria sneered, looking me up and down. Working hard as a mid-level loan officer, Caleb? I heard you were doing desk work at Apex. I am doing very well, Aunt Victoria, I replied smoothly, taking a light sip from my water glass. Congratulations on the new funding. Oh, don't pretend you aren't bitter, she laughed condescendingly. Brandon secured that commercial mortgage in less than 3 weeks. He didn't need 10 years of bean counting like you did. He has real vision. A mortgage backed by the Sterling estate itself, I noted casually. That is a very aggressive leverage strategy. It is bold, forward-thinking strategy, Victoria declared, tossing her hair back. Something your father never had, and clearly something you inherited from him. Brandon is leading this family into the future. You are just a forgotten footnote. I hope Brandon checked the variable rate adjustments for month 6. I said softly, looking directly into her eyes. High-interest commercial debt can be very unforgiving if cash flow dips. Brandon knows exactly what he is doing, she snapped, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered her arrogant composure. We don't need financial advice from an ousted accountant. Keep reviewing our files from your little cubicle, Caleb. She turned on her heel and strutted away, returning to the reporters to continue boasting about their newfound capital. Eleanor stepped up beside me, watching Victoria walk away. She has no idea you are the head of commercial lending who approved that exact paper, does she? None at all, I said calmly. She thinks Brandon outsmarted the system. The first major interest adjustment hits their corporate account in 90 days, Eleanor noted, checking her tablet. Given their current burn rate, they won't even cover the interest payment, let alone the principal balance. Brandon spent 30% of that loan money buying a new yacht and funding luxury promotional events, I said, watching Brandon across the room as he popped another bottle of champagne with investors. He thinks debt is profit. And when they default? Eleanor asked, her tone serious. Apex will be legally obligated to seize the Sterling estate as collateral. Then we will seize it, I said, my voice cold, calm, and steady. They wanted the crown without the burden of building the foundation. Now they're going to learn what happens when the foundation gives way. I turned away from the noise of the summit, leaving my family to celebrate their temporary illusion of wealth, fully aware that their countdown had officially begun. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my corner office at Apex Commercial Holdings. I sat behind my desk, holding the red-stamped delinquency file that had arrived at 6 this morning. They missed the deadline, Caleb, Franklin said, placing a second folder on my desk. The 30-day grace period expired at midnight. Sterling Real Estate is officially in default. Did they try to transfer funds? I asked. Brandon attempted to clear the payment using a bounced check from an overdrawn account, Franklin replied, shaking his head. Their liquid reserves are completely gone. The interest adjustment broke them. Set up the executive boardroom, I said, standing up and buttoning my dark suit jacket. Aunt Victoria and Arthur called the main line 20 minutes ago, demanding an emergency meeting with the head of commercial lending. They're in the lobby right now. Do they know it's you? Franklin asked. No, I replied softly. They think they are meeting an anonymous bank executive. 10 minutes later, I stood outside the double doors of the glass boardroom. Through the clear panels, I could see Arthur sitting stiffly at the long conference table, clutching his wooden cane. Aunt Victoria was pacing back and forth, waving her hands nervously, while Brandon sat slump-shouldered, frantically scrolling through his phone. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. Victoria turned around immediately, her face tight with artificial charm. Sir, we are so glad you could see us on such short notice. She froze dead in her tracks, her mouth hanging open. Arthur raised his eyes, his breath hitching as his knuckles turned white around his cane. Brandon dropped his phone onto the polished mahogany table with a loud clatter. Caleb! Brandon gasped, stumbling to his feet. What the hell are you doing in here? I work here, Brandon, I said calmly, walking to the head of the table and pulling out the leather executive chair. In fact, I am the head of commercial lending. You! Aunt Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking with pure disbelief. You are the executive overseeing our mortgage debt? That is correct, I said, opening the thick red file in front of me. You requested an emergency meeting regarding the overdue $75 million balance on the Sterling estate. Arthur stared at me, his weathered face draining of all color. Caleb, you were the one who approved our loan restructuring 3 months ago? I was grandfather. I replied, meeting his gaze directly. I personally signed the underwriting. You set us up, Brandon yelled, slamming his hands onto the table, his eyes wild with panic. You knew the interest rate would jump in month 6. You did this on purpose to ruin me. I didn't set you up, Brandon, I said, my voice dropping into an icy, steady tone. You applied for a high-risk commercial mortgage because you spent your operating capital on luxury cars and failed developments. I simply approved the loan terms you willingly signed. Listen to me, Caleb, Victoria interjected, rushing toward my desk with pleading eyes. We are family. You cannot do this to your own blood. We just need a 6-month extension on the principal payment. Just sign a waiver. Apex Commercial Holdings does not grant extensions on defaulted notes, I stated coldly. Especially not when the collateral is facing immediate seizure. You arrogant little brat, Brandon sneered, taking a step toward me. You think you're powerful now because you sit behind a fancy desk? You owe everything you know to the Sterling name. You owe my grandfather. I owe this family nothing, I replied, standing up and towering over him. I gave 10 years of my life to Sterling Real Estate, and you threw me out like trash the moment you thought you didn't need me. Caleb, please. Arthur spoke up, his voice trembling as he leaned heavily on his cane to stand. This is my life's work. The Sterling estate has been in our family for 3 generations. You cannot take our home. I am not taking it, Arthur, I said, sliding an official legal document across the table toward him. Your grandson Brandon surrendered it when he defaulted. This is the formal notice of foreclosure. Victoria gasped, grabbing the paper. Foreclosure? No. You can't do this. Read page 4, Aunt Victoria, I urged softly. And while you read it, ask Brandon about the liquidity statements he submitted to pass our credit check. Arthur frowned, looking at his grandson. What liquidity statements? He lied on the federal credit application, Arthur, I revealed, pointing at the highlighted figures on the document. Brandon submitted falsified offshore bank records to pretend he had $20 million in cash reserves. That is bank fraud. Arthur turned his head slowly, staring at Brandon in complete horror. Brandon, is this true? Brandon shrank back, unable to meet his grandfather's eyes, his face turning pale and damp with sweat. Grandfather, I was just trying to keep the projects moving. I thought we would make the money back. You lied to the bank? Arthur choked out, his voice breaking as the harsh reality shattered his pride. You committed fraud and put my home up as collateral? Victoria told me to do whatever it took to get the loan, Brandon yelled, pointing an accusing finger at his mother. She said Caleb was weak and that we needed to show the board we could raise capital. You fool, Arthur shouted, his cane rattling against the floor as he looked between Victoria and Brandon. You destroyed everything. My firm, my home, my legacy, you destroyed it all. The auction for the Sterling estate is scheduled for next Friday, I said calmly, closing the red folder with a decisive snap. I suggest you hire a good attorney, Brandon. Federal auditors will be reviewing your filings by morning. Victoria sank into a chair, weeping hysterically, while Arthur stood frozen, looking at me with eyes full of overwhelming shock and tragic realization. Meeting adjourned, I said, walking toward the exit without looking back. My private office on the top floor of Apex Commercial Holdings was quiet as the evening rain tapped against the glass windows. I was reviewing the final liquidation schedules for the upcoming auction when my intercom buzzed. Caleb, there is an elderly gentleman at reception asking for you. My assistant's voice came through the speaker. He doesn't have an appointment, but he claims he is your grandfather. I paused, holding my pen in midair. Arthur. Yes, Caleb, she confirmed softly. He looks exhausted. Should I ask security to escort him downstairs? I stared at the closed door of my office, feeling a brief pang of old memories rise in my chest before pushing it down. No, I replied into the microphone. Send him in. A moment later, the door swung open slowly. Arthur stepped into the room, leaning heavily on his wooden cane. The towering, proud man who had once ruled the family with an iron fist looked shrunk, frail, and broken. He wore a plain coat, his eyes sunken and red. "Caleb," he whispered, his voice trembling as he stopped near the edge of my desk. "Hello, Arthur," I said, remaining seated behind my mahogany desk. "You shouldn't have come here." "I had to see you," Arthur choked out, taking a slow, painful step forward. "The bank posted the official foreclosure notice on the gates of the estate yesterday afternoon. Victoria and Brandon have already packed their bags and fled to a hotel, leaving me alone in that empty house. They were always quick to run when things got difficult," I said calmly. "Sit down before you fall." Arthur pulled back the leather chair across from me and sat down heavily, resting his trembling hands over the curved handle of his cane. "I came to bring you something," Arthur said, reaching into his inner coat pocket with shaking fingers. He pulled out a worn, antique silver pocket watch and placed it gently on the polished wood between us. I looked down at the watch, and my breath caught in my throat. I recognized the intricate leaf engravings instantly. "Your father's watch," Arthur murmured, tears welling in his old eyes. "He gave it to me before he passed away, telling me to pass it on to you when you were ready to lead the family." I picked up the cool silver timepiece, feeling its heavy weight in my palm. Holding that watch brought back a rush of painful memories. I remembered being 12 years old, sitting on the porch with my father as he explained the value of hard work, loyalty, and honor. I remembered how deeply I had loved my family, and how desperately I had worked for 10 years to earn Arthur's trust and respect after my father died. My heart remembered loving him back then, but as I looked across the desk at the broken old man weeping in front of me, I felt no anger, nor did I feel any desire for revenge. "Why bring this to me now, Arthur?" I asked quietly. "Because I was a fool, Caleb," Arthur sobbed, burying his face in his trembling hands. "My pride blinded me. Victoria whispered poison in my ear for years, and I was too arrogant to see the truth. I chose bloodlines and empty promises over real loyalty. You were the only one who truly cared about me, about your father's memory, and about this family. I gave you 10 years of my life, Arthur," I reminded him gently. "I asked for nothing except equity and trust." "I know," he cried, looking up at me with tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "And I threw you out in the rain like trash. I ruined everything, Caleb. I ruined my son's legacy. I lost my life's work, and I lost you. I am begging you, please. Use your position at this bank to stop the foreclosure auction. Save the Sterling estate. I will sign the entire property over to you tomorrow. Just don't let our family name be erased." I looked down at the silver pocket watch in my hand, tracing the smooth metal surface with my thumb. "I forgive you, Arthur," I said softly. Arthur gasped, a sudden flare of desperate hope lighting up his bloodshot eyes. "You do? You will save the house." "No," I replied, gently setting the watch back down on the desk and pushing it toward him. "I will not stop the foreclosure." The light in his eyes died instantly, replaced by utter devastation. "Caleb, please, you just said you forgive me." "I do forgive you," I explained, looking him directly in the eyes with steady, absolute clarity. "Forgiveness is about freeing my own heart from bitterness and hatred. I hold no anger toward you anymore, Arthur. But forgiveness does not reverse the financial realities of your choices. It is just a signature for you, Caleb," Arthur pleaded, grabbing the edge of my desk. "You are the head of commercial lending. You have the power to halt the auction. Power does not mean I should wipe away the natural consequences of Brandon's fraud and your misplaced trust," I said firmly. "You chose Brandon because of direct lineage. You chose to value titles over character. Brandon took out a loan he could not pay, and now the debt must be settled. Where am I supposed to go?" Arthur whispered, his voice cracking into a frail, whimpering sound. "I have nowhere left to go. I have already arranged for a comfortable apartment near the city center, paid for out of my personal funds for the rest of your life," I answered quietly. "You will not be homeless, Arthur, but the Sterling estate is gone." Arthur stared at me, his mouth trembling as the finality of my decision settled over him like a cold blanket. He slowly reached out, picked up the silver watch, and closed his weathered fist around it. "You really are a self-made man now, aren't you?" Arthur choked out, standing up with difficulty. You don't need my approval anymore. I haven't needed it for a very long time, I said, standing up to open the office door for him. Arthur walked out in quiet tears, clutching his cane and his son's watch, finally understanding that lost respect and broken trust can never be bought back. The auction hammer struck the wooden pedestal with a loud, echoic thud that rang through the city municipal hall. Sold, the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing across the room. The historic Sterling estate is sold to Sterling Capital Foundations for $55 million. I stood in the back row of the auditorium, wearing a tailored black suit. Beside me, Eleanor Vance smiled, taking a slow step toward me while adjusting her coat. Congratulations, Caleb, Eleanor said warmly. You officially own the property. It must feel strange buying back the house you were thrown out of 4 years ago. It doesn't feel strange at all, Eleanor, I replied smoothly, looking down at the deed of purchase in my hand. Because I didn't buy it back to live in the past. I bought it to build something entirely new. Franklin Ross walked over from the registrar's desk, holding a signed legal folder. The title transfer is officially complete, Caleb. The bank's debt on the estate is cleared, and the foreclosure case is closed. What about Brandon and Victoria? I asked, looking at Franklin. Brandon accepted a plea deal with federal prosecutors yesterday, Franklin explained quietly. He agreed to 3 years of probation for financial record falsification, and Aunt Victoria signed over her remaining corporate accounts to cover his legal fees. They are moving out of the state this weekend. And Arthur? Eleanor asked softly. How is your grandfather doing? He moved into the apartment I secured for him near the park, I said, looking out toward the sunny street outside. He spends his days reading. He didn't come to the auction today, but he sent me a brief text this morning wishing me good luck. Are you ready for the ribbon-cutting ceremony? Eleanor asked, gesturing toward the waiting car outside. The entire board of Sterling Capital Foundations is waiting for us at the estate. Let's go, I said, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunlight. 20 minutes later, the iron gates of the Sterling estate opened. The corporate signs that once bore my family's crest were gone, replaced by sleek metallic letters reading, Sterling Entrepreneurship Foundation. In the courtyard, dozens of young business leaders, university scholars, and venture capitalists stood mingling near the main entrance, holding champagne glasses. Everyone, if I could have your attention, Eleanor announced, stepping onto the raised stone porch alongside Franklin and me. The crowd turned, clapping as the noise settled into quiet anticipation. 4 years ago, Caleb Sterling came to Apex Commercial Holdings with nothing but his mind, his ethics, and an unyielding work ethic, Eleanor declared into the microphone. Today, he launches a $50 million fund dedicated to funding underprivileged entrepreneurs who lack corporate backing. I give you the founder, Caleb Sterling. The crowd erupted into warm applause. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the diverse group of young innovators staring back at me. Thank you, everyone. I began, my voice steady, clear, and calm. When I was younger, I believed that success was defined by bloodlines, titles, and inherited wealth. I spent a decade trying to prove my worth to a family business that treated loyalty as a commodity. The crowd remained silent, listening intently to every word. When I was cut out of my family's legacy, I thought my life was over. I continued, making eye contact with Franklin and Eleanor. But I learned that true legacy is not something given to you by someone else. It is something you build with your own hands through discipline, integrity, and self-belief. This foundation exists so that no hardworking entrepreneur ever has to sacrifice their dignity for an opportunity. I picked up the ceremonial golden scissors, cutting the thick red ribbon draped across the heavy entrance doors. Cheers broke out across the lawn as glasses clinked together in celebration. A brilliant speech, Caleb, Franklin said, walking up to me with 2 champagne glasses and handing me one. The board approved the first 10 grant applications for our incubator program. That is excellent news, Franklin, I said, taking a sip. Make sure our risk evaluation process remains completely objective. We fund merit, not promises. Understood, boss, Franklin smiled, heading toward the main lounge to meet with investors. I walked through the open glass doors, heading up the grand staircase that I had walked down 4 years ago as a disinherited grandson. I walked past the mahogany boardroom, stepping out onto the third-floor balcony that overlooked the deep blue harbor and the city skyline. The sea breeze was cool, blowing gently through my hair as the late afternoon sun turned the sky into brilliant shades of gold and amber. Eleanor stepped onto the balcony beside me, resting her arms against the stone railing while looking out at the ocean. "You look at peace, Caleb," Eleanor noted quietly. "Most men who go through what you went through would be consumed by hatred or bitter victory. I used to think my victory would be watching my family suffer for what they did to me," I admitted softly, looking down at the silver watch my father had left me, which now sat safely in my pocket. "But standing here today, I realized their collapse wasn't my victory at all." "What was your victory?" she asked softly. "My victory was realizing that my value was never tied to their approval," I replied, taking a deep breath of the fresh evening air. "They didn't ruin me when they threw me away. They just forced me to become the architect of my own life." "So, what is the next step for Sterling Capital?" Eleanor asked with a light smile. "We keep building, Eleanor," I said, turning my back on the old ghost of the mansion and facing the bright city skyline ahead. "We keep building,